How's everyone doing? Just checking to make sure the mic's on. So today we're already on book number 6, and this is Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning. It looks at Police Battalion 101, who was involved in many murders in Nazi Germany against the Jews and other people. There's a lot of historical repetition in this book that you may already know. It's not a bad thing to reiterate those points. But what's really interesting about this book, and specifically, is it looks into the psychology behind Police Battalion 101. And what's specific with that unit is that they have a lot of historical evidence and records, and firsthand accounts from people in that unit. Whereas you could imagine, a lot of the other records may get lost or destroyed, right? Because I'm sure those people wouldn't really want their info to get out at that time after they just performed mass murders for years on millions of people. So, from a psychological view, trying to look into the minds of these guys and just, looking at the history of it, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Nazi Germany. But if you're not, look into it, right? But if you are familiar with it, taking it, just trying to wrap your head around how could this have happened, and to have some of those records from the people who did it, that's the best way to try and get a grasp on it. I mean, we can speculate all we want, but reading a first-hand accounts, that's something I haven't done hardly ever in that case. You hear all the stories and you hear the victim side, but to have it from the offender's side, to me, that was really, really interesting. And I saw Jordan Peterson had recommended this book. I'm pretty sure it was him on his list, so I gave it a read. And I'm just going to share some lessons that I thought about while I was reading it, maybe a couple points from the book, and we'll go from there. So in the preface, page XXVI, it says, ultimately, the Holocaust took place because at the most basic level, individual human beings killed other human beings in large numbers over an extended period of time. Very oversimplified, right? But is that the truth? At the most basic level, individual human beings killed other human beings in large numbers over an extended period of time. That's what happened. And just I like to think of how could things have been prevented. You look at it, individual humans killed other people. And I know you may be thinking, oh yeah, common sense, obviously that's what happened. But when you look at the psychology, when these guys were talking about how some didn't want to do it, there's some leaders who maybe they had to pass the command down to their people to do it, but then they weren't part of it. They would leave. So granted, there's the sadists in there who wanted to inflict this agony on people, but how many people wanted it to stop but just kept doing it? But as we saw, all of these people collectively kept murdering and murdering more people, and that's what led to the atrocities we know of. So them just oversimplifying it, people killed other people for a long period of time. That's what happened. Preface, page XIX. As the story of Reserve Police Battalion 101 demonstrates, mass murder and routine had become one. Normality itself had become exceedingly abnormal. In other videos, I talk about what many people have said, but it's to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Right? And we use that to train our mind to do things we may not like or we may not want to do. like take an ice bath or go on a run or show up early to work or show up to work, right? You get the point. But this excerpt kind of shines light on the opposite of how you can fall in a routine of doing things you don't like. Because if we can get comfortable with doing hard things that help us, could we get comfortable with doing hard things that don't help us? In this case, was it stealing from people, lying, murdering, selling your soul, giving up your values? Reading into it, there's a lot of people who did not want to do it. But as this says, mass murder and routine had become one. Over time, whether or not you want to be a part of it, if you stick around it long enough, normality itself had become exceedingly abnormal. I just kind of like that comparison when it talks about normality itself had become exceedingly abnormal. If you're going to take an ice bath, and we look on this side of the spectrum, you're going to take an ice bath, you're going to work out, you're going to eat healthy, all those things are abnormal to you, or they may be. But when you work towards them enough until they become a normality and become comfortable, that's the level you're at now. You're just so used to doing it. You're in that routine. You take that ideology and now you look at it like in the book, Browning talks about with their life, no matter how crazy that sounds, that had become normal to those people. After years of doing it, somehow mass murder became normal. It became a routine. It became the job, right? So I think that's important to know. Obviously, to realize how you can become a bad person, right? How you can do bad things. Think about who you hang out with or the bad habits you may have. Can that become normal? If you try a drug, but you don't want to become a drug addict, right? You don't want to become addicted, but you try it. If you keep trying and trying and trying, can you do that enough to where it becomes a routine? And now you became that thing you did not want to become because you became comfortable with it, right? You do something enough and you start accepting it enough and it becomes part of your routine. Well, that's a sense of normality. No matter how, like the book says, exceedingly abnormal it is, anything can become normal. One more thing, I guess, would be look at everyone's life all across the world. The problem someone has in a different country, maybe they're walking 3 miles a day just to get a drink of water. Maybe they don't have access to foods, right? Maybe they're starving for 3 days and then they get food every fourth day. Could that become normal to them? That's what they've done their whole life. Whereas someone on the other end of the spectrum, they have everything they could ever want. And now let's say the place they go to get coffee's closed. That could be the end of the world for them. So if you look at anyone in life, this idea that anything can become normal applies to everyone because that's just human nature. You're going to adapt. The human body can adapt to anything, and it will. It's almost like when people get a lot of money, what they have when they have nothing, they're so appreciative if they get one little thing. If I have nothing and I get an apartment and there's nothing in my apartment and I get a new bed, I'm going to be so appreciative. But if you take that for granted or you take the people around you for granted, you're going to stop appreciating it. Let's say now I get a house and I have everything in my house and I get a new bed. Am I going to be as appreciative of that bed when I have everything I want? You may, but you may forget to realize your values and realize what was important to you. And that's the danger, because if you lose sight of yourself if you lose sight of the things and people around you, you may not appreciate them like you should because it became normal to you. So I guess that's kind of the deal. When things become normal, it's almost you forgetting to think about it. It's like you do something so many times you stop thinking. Because in the beginning, you may have cared a lot about it, whether it was caring a lot, like I love this bed, or caring a lot, like I hate murdering people, right? I don't want to murder someone. And you think about it so much because you care so much about it and it means a lot to you. But when something becomes normal, that's when you stop thinking about it. In this book, I can't speak for all of them, but the stories they said, the people had such strong feelings about killing someone, but after doing it for month on end, they stopped thinking about it. Right? Maybe we'll talk later. It talked about all the psychological warfare almost that had people played on them to take their mind off of it. Because that's the danger. When people stop thinking, it's going to become normal. They're not going to care what's going on because you can't care about something if you're not thinking about it, right? You can accept it. You can say, hey, I accept I'm going to be starving for the next 3 days. Hey, I accept that this is my job and I need to do this. That doesn't mean it's right. That just means you stopped thinking, you stopped caring. It's like your body. If you stop caring about your body, you get fat, you have poor health, maybe you develop diabetes, all these things that could happen. It's not that you want that to happen, it's just that you stopped thinking about it. You just accepted it as it's going to happen. And I really just like to look into all the psychological things that happen to people, especially on extreme ends of the spectrum. Because if I can take lessons from them, then I can definitely apply it to my life, right? Like when we read Man's Search for Meaning. If this guy can find a meaning to make it through the Holocaust, can I find a meaning in my own life? Definitely, right? One of the worst things in history, you try and find a person from each event and try and learn from them. So, with this case, finding out how an ordinary person could go from working in a shop to murdering hundreds of Jews themselves, possibly each day alone, then maybe this will help you scale it back to you and go, hey, how do I not fall into not working out? How do I not fall into lying to people? How do I not fall into sin? How do I stay true to myself, right? Because if I learn how they went to the far end of the spectrum in a bad way, maybe you can learn how not to fall into whatever temptations you have on a smaller scale. Page 2. Pale and nervous, with choking voice and tears in his eyes, Trapp visibly fought to control himself as he spoke. The battalion, he said plaintively, had to perform a frightfully unpleasant task. This assignment was not to his liking. Indeed, it was highly regrettable, but the orders came from the highest authorities. If it would make their task any easier, the men should remember that in Germany the bombs were falling on women and children. Women, children, and elderly were to be shot on the spot by the battalion. There's two things with this excerpt that I wanted to point out. And the first is how he talks about it being frightful, highly regrettable, unpleasant, something he does not want to do, or even seems like he doesn't want his men to do. But what does he say? Orders came from the highest authorities. When I talked about selling your soul earlier, it means giving up your values, not being the person inside that you know you are or who you want to be. And how many times are we influenced by other people? Whether it's maybe you watch the news and you form a belief, maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's someone you watch on YouTube. How many times do you follow them with a blind eye, even if it's against your beliefs? Always be open minded to what people have to say. It's never bad to hear an idea. That's never going to hurt you. What's going to hurt you is if you're a follower without being able to think about what you want for yourself and decipher what's right from wrong. And the second part is how he talks about if it was going to make it easier. Remember that the Germany, their German women and children were being murdered. Bombs were being dropped on them. So it's just the psychology of what reasonings do we use to make things easier when they're not right. If they're saying, hey, I'm going to go kill these women and children, hey, if it's going to make it any easier, imagine this thing, remember this is happening. You knowing something's not right, but coming up with an excuse to do it. Apply that to your life or my life. I'm thinking, how many times do you do that on a smaller scale, obviously, right? It's like, oh, I should go work out. Yeah, but if I go work out, it's not really going to feel good. If that's going to make it easier not to work out, I should remember that I'm going to feel better. I need a day off. Like, how many times do you make an excuse not to do something or to make something easier? It's just psychology of how, if they're using that rationale for a way to murder someone, it's probably not good to use that rationale on yourself because that rationale is strong enough. The danger is the rationale is strong enough to get you to do something you shouldn't be doing. If they don't want to murder someone and they use that ideology, that defense mechanism, and it allows them to murder someone, well, that's going to set yourself up for failure. Because if that gets someone to murder someone, it's definitely going to get me not to work out. You get what I'm saying? Or let's say eat healthy. If I want to eat something unhealthy, if I'm on a strict diet and I go, hey, I really want to go eat McDonald's. I don't want to, but if I use that mechanism, I'm going to go, hey, if it makes it any easier, remember that eating healthy for one day isn't really going to make that big of a difference. You're right, it's not. So I'm going to go eat the McDonald's. I'm not trying to scale things back from the book. I want to share the points they have, but I also want to share thoughts I think about, because I like to learn the lessons of, hey, what was going on at that time. But then there's the reverse side, and I go, hey, what lessons can I bring to my own table to try and help my own life? So I don't want you guys to think I'm trying to scale everything back. Obviously, I want to share some of the points, but I've said before, I'm not here to read the book. Basically, with these videos, I want to share things I thought about while I read the book. And then if you decide to read it or you don't have time to read it, then you can get this side of the story. Page 126. Jews were hidden in a house. It kind of talked about some Jews were found by the Germans and there was a shootout. People died on both sides. As you can imagine, the Germans would not be happy about that. So the German police then went in search of the owner of the house, a Polish woman who had managed to flee in time. She was tracked to her father's house in a nearby village. Lieutenant Brand presented the father with a stark choice, his life or his daughter's. The man surrendered his daughter, who was shot on the spot. And that one just really got to me. how a father could give up his daughter's life over his own. And this is just my own thoughts on it. It just goes over, I don't know, like looking at all the other people in this time. And I'm sure it applies to everyone now. We can't say what we would do in that time if you're not in it. Right? But to give up your daughter's life when they say, "Hey, we're either going to shoot you or we're going to shoot your daughter." To say, "Oh, here's my daughter." To me, that just I get everything else in this book, and in that time is messed up as well. But this example I just wanted to share, just to reiterate, not selling your soul, right? If you have values, you should never surrender your values to someone else. If someone says, "Hey, I'm going to shoot you or shoot your daughter," I don't know. I couldn't imagine a lot of this stuff. I know it all happened, but just thinking to yourself how you could murder all these people, men, women, children, babies, burn people's houses down with them in there, and to have someone come up to your own kid and say, "Hey, either you can die or your kid." None of us want to die, but it's just the murder, the killing just never stopped. And it was on so many different levels. And just when I was reading that part about this this girl, I didn't look into whether or not she was knowing of the Jews in her house. I'm assuming she was. Either way, it doesn't matter the outcome. But a woman, anyone, trying to stand up against the Germans and help some Jews possibly escape, right, by hiding in your house. You're trying to be that change. You get caught, they bring you to your father, and he's basically the finger on the trigger to decide who gets shot. I know it's not his fault, but you're trying to help some Jews be saved, and it comes back to your own father choosing for you to die over him. The situation she was in, that's a tough one. And I don't know. I don't know what that says about what side the father was on. Because looking at that time, you should be trying to help the Jews. Page 10. It gives us the opportunity to exterminate anyone who is hostile to us. Naturally, the vast area must be pacified as quickly as possible. This will happen best through shooting anyone who even looks askance at us. I just wanted to share that real quick. Not to go in too much because I know this video is going to get long. But to shoot anyone who has askance upon us, granted, I'm sure we all can assume and know the Nazis were not open-minded for change, right? For change against their plan. But as a reader, you need to understand and hopefully learn that you need to be open-minded. And I know it may sound like common sense in Nazi Germany that they weren't open-minded and they should have been, but take it back, scale it back to your own life. How many people do you know who are closed-minded to certain topics? Because anyone can say I'm open-minded to something I like, but are you open-minded to anybody's idea? And that's the tough part. But you should be, because an idea is never bad. You get to choose what you believe in, you get to choose what to follow. But if you can't listen to someone's idea, how are you ever going to change? That's the danger. Because if you're close-minded and you choose to stick and latch to a belief and it happens to be wrong, you're never going to change and you're going to be on that wrong side. I've said it before, but, well, one, facts are stubborn things. Follow the facts, be on the right side. And the other is if someone's telling you something, it's either a fact or it's made up. And if it's a fact and you don't like it, well, you should probably change something about it. there's no point in getting mad, right? Listen to their point, and if it's a fact, well, you should thank them because they just opened your eyes. And if it's made up, then who cares? You listen to their idea and it's made up, you move on. But to be closed minded, I know it sounds like common sense on this large of a scale, right? Like everyone should be open minded, but look at yourself and ask yourself, look at those around you and ask them how many people are open minded to anything you talk about, or how many people get mad when you bring something up or try and help them or shut you down. Do you see the danger in it? The danger is that if you're closed minded and you're wrong, if you're closed minded and you're wrong, you're going to be in a world of hurt. Not only because you end up on the wrong side of history, but you lose yourself, your values, and your soul along the way. And if you wait 20 years later until you figure out the truth, are you going to be filled with regret for the eternity you just spent in a lie? Page 11. It was in fact a shooting license against Russian civilians. The war, he said, was a war against Jews and Bolsheviks, and he wanted it understood that the battalion should proceed ruthlessly against Jews. In his view, the meaning of the Fuhrer's orders was that the Jews, regardless of age or sex, was to be destroyed. They were killing everyone. And I wanted to point this one out because it says, in his view, the meaning of the Fuhrer's orders was that the Jews, regardless of age or sex, was to be destroyed. Granted, I'm sure everyone was on the same wavelength and mindset. But to put it into text that it's in his view that this should be done, we've talked in other videos many times about why would you want to believe this? Right? Why would you want to believe that's someone's view? Even if you misunderstand someone or you interpret it as something. To me, that's inferring that it was not exactly spoken to this guy. And you may say, well, everyone knew people were dying. Everyone knew they were getting murdered. But in this book, it talks about a lot of times they would say, you know what to do, or do what needs to be done. It wasn't necessarily telling them what to do each time. And they did that. It talks about the psychological manipulations that were played on these men because as they withheld the information, it almost made it easier for the men to do it. Because if you told them, hey, in 2 weeks, you need to go kill a baby and a woman and, take her kids away from her and then take the men off to a gas camp or a work camp, that's going to have negative effects on their mental health, obviously. All of this does. But the psychological manipulation they did was withhold some of this information almost to get them to do more things that they wanted to do. It's kind of twisted, the things it talks about. Obviously, the whole thing's twisted. But I guess the point I'm saying is when it says in his view, the meaning was for all these people to be destroyed. And I just don't like that, people lose hope in themselves and their dignity and their soul. And I think that we should all hope for the best. And we should all want to believe good things are going to happen. And we shouldn't want to believe, and I know I'm just speaking off lessons I'm thinking about. Obviously, I know the text. I know they were all killing everyone, right? But I'm saying, in his view, the Fuhrer's meaning was for everyone to be destroyed. And I just don't know why anyone would want to have that view. Whether or not it's true, why would you want to believe that? I would never, you know what I mean? You would never want to be to that point in your life. Like wherever you're at, whatever you're thinking about, you should never want to be down there where you're going, man. And in his view, everyone needs to die, right? Because everyone's on different points. If you scale that back to you, Is it in your view that all people are bad? Is it in your view that nothing good happens? Do you see how that can scale to the point he was at? And that's the danger I'm saying is you learn from them and you go, hey, I don't want to get down to that point. If you're already at the point where you see all these people going, I don't care about anything, I don't care about anyone, no one likes me, nothing good happens to me. Well, you see what that escalates to, or devolves to, or evolves to, whichever way you want to put it. Learn from them and learn from the talks we've had before. Why would you want to think like that? Even if everyone around you is a bad person, or if that's what you think, why would you want to have in your head that, hey, the next time I see this person, it's going to be a bad time. Next time I go with this coworker, they're going to annoy me. They're not going to do their job. Next time I see this friend, they're going to say something about me I don't like. Right? Do you see what I'm trying to say? That's what I was thinking about. I'm like, why would you want to have that view? If you can choose to believe whatever you want, why wouldn't you want to say, no, you know what? Things are going to change. People aren't going to get killed today. I'm going to stay true to myself. My friends are going to come over and we're going to have a great time. My coworker's going to do his best job, the best job he's ever done. And I'm going to have a great day. Good things are going to happen to me. I'm preaching that you should want to believe good things are going to happen to you. And you look at everything in this book, all these people's thoughts, and it was one bad thing after the next. And when I read, when it's the cover is Ordinary Men, and it talks about how these group of ordinary men, so-called ordinary, ended up being a force in Nazi Germany, murdering sometimes thousands of Jews just in their battalion a day, thousands upon thousands. Then you should want to try and learn about the way they thought to get to that point and use that to develop another way of thinking so that you don't degress, right? We want to progress towards righteousness, towards the right way, towards being a good person. If that's what they did to become an awful person in that sense, well, those are just some things I was thinking about when I was reading it. So I know some of these books like this are hard to read, especially I wasn't involved in it, and just reading about it, it's sickening. All the things these people did, all the things that even reading Man's Search for Meaning, all the things that happened to the other side, right? It hurts to read what these people devolved to. Think about what happened to all these men, women, and children, kids, grandparents, fathers, daughters. It's all messed up all around. And they say history repeats itself. But learning and thinking about these things is never a bad thing. It's always better to think about your future and think about who you are. Because although nothing is 100% predictable, it's at least good to try and have a vision of where you want to be. Because without one, you may just wake up 5 years later and be in a spot you don't want to be. So never get comfortable on a path you don't want to be on. Fight for what you believe and keep pushing. So that's Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning.